Dr. Dahwa, but due to some changes, she had to come after Dr. Dahwa.
The Lever Arch file containing the affidavit or statement of Ms. Matulwane Emily Mpshe will be marked Exhibit DD15A, and the one with the rest of annexures to a statement will be marked Exhibit DD15B.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Ms. Mpshe, there are two files in front of you, one with your statement and some of the annexures, and the other one contains the balance of your annexures. If you look at Exhibit DD15A, from page 1 to 35, do you confirm that?
I think you must wait for her to see which file is which one. Have you got both files in front of you? Okay, all right. And you understand which one is Exhibit DD15A and which one is Exhibit DD15B? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mpshe. Do you confirm that the document that is in DDA from page 1 to page 35 is the statement, your affidavit that you prepared for the commission?
I confirm, it is correct.
And the signature that...
I'm sorry. Please switch on your mic, and then Ms. Butchers will have to ask that question afresh so that her answer can go into the record.
Thank you, Chair. Do you confirm that the document that appears on page 1 to page 36 on Exhibit DDA is your affidavit that you made for the commission?
I do confirm.
And the signature that appears on page 35 of that document, do you confirm that is your signature?
I confirm it's my signature.
Thank you, Ms. Mpshe. Ms. Mpshe, would you please place your qualifications and the positions that you have held at SAA to record?
My qualifications are as follows. I have a postgraduate diploma in business management from University of Warwick in the UK. I have a BCom from University of South Africa. I have an associate banking diploma from the Institute of Bankers in South Africa. I have an licentiate international banking diploma from Institute of Bankers in South Africa. And I also have various other programs that I've attended in line with my career.
Yes, and when did you join SAA?
I joined SAA on the 1st of September 2010.
And what position did you hold at the time?
I was General Manager, Human Resources.
And when did you leave SAA?
I left SAA officially on the 30th of March 2018.
And what position do you currently hold and for which company?
I'm the Acting General Manager, Human Capital at South African Express Airways.
Yes. On page 3 of your statement, that's paragraph 10, you deal with your appointment as an acting CEO at SAA in mid-2015. Could you please briefly tell us the circumstances that led to your appointment as an acting CEO?
It was, I think it was the end of July in 2015. We were called as the executive committee into what we call a small boardroom by one of the board members, Mr. Tony Dixon, for an urgent meeting. At that urgent meeting, Mr. Tony Dixon informed us that the chairperson of the board has asked him to relay the message to us that Mr. Nico Becerra is to return to Mango Airlines. Mr. Becerra was the acting CEO at SAA at that time. He wants to return to Mango Airlines, where his role is a CEO of Mango. And immediately he then informed us that the chair had also instructed that I be appointed as the acting CEO.
Yes. And for how long did you remain in this position as a CEO?
From July to November.
Yes. If I look at paragraph 13 of your statement, you're saying at first you refused to accept this position, but upon persuasion by your colleagues and discussions with family, you accepted. My question is, why were you refusing at the first place?
I refused because it came as a shock that, for me, it was unceremonious that we just been informed that Mr. Nico Becerra had to go back to Mango. As the acting CEO at that time, he was responsible for the 90-day turnaround strategy. And it was just too sudden.
And how long was Mr. Becerra in that position prior to your appointment?
Must have been April 2014, when the previous CEO, Mr. Kalawe, left. And prior to that, he was also acting CEO.
So it was for about 2 months at the time?
Yes.
Yes. And who succeeded you?
Well, Ms. Buthelezi, Ms. Mpshe, although she is asking you the questions, the person you are telling the story is me.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, so I need to see and observe as you give evidence. So you are telling the story to me.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry about that, Chair. Please look, when you answer, please do answer to the Chair. Ms. Mpshe, who succeeded you in this position when you left?
I was succeeded by...
Well, maybe before we get there, you have indicated that initially you refused the acting appointment as CEO, and you said that was because the whole decision was too sudden. Now, had there been any discussion at all with you to indicate that there was an inclination to appoint you as acting CEO on the part of the board or the chairperson of the board? Or were you hearing this for the first time like everybody?
Chair, there was no indication whatsoever. The first time I heard about it was when we were in a meeting with all the executive committee members. And it was also one of my reasons where I felt that I was not even afforded the courtesy to be informed upfront. And just in a meeting, the news was just thrown at me like that.
And you had not been asked whether you would be willing to accept the appointment if such a decision was taken?
Chair, I was not asked. The message was the chair says you will be the acting CEO.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And you said you remained in this position until November 2015.
That's correct.
Who then came after you?
Mr. Musa Zwani.
Thank you. On the next topic on your affidavit, it appears on page 4 of your affidavit, you deal with chairpersons' interference with daily operations. Further down on the next page, you have given some examples of instances that you would describe as interference by the chair on daily operations at SAA. First of all, who is the chair that you are referring to?
The chair I'm referring to is Ms. Dudu Mieni.
Thank you. You give us some examples of the interference by the chair. The first...
Well, maybe before that, Ms. Mpshe, I've had evidence to the effect that there was a time when the board of SAA consisted of only 3 directors, non-executive directors. I think it was Ms. Dudumieni, Ms. Kwinana, and I think Dr. Tabi.
Dr. Tambi.
Yeah, Tambi.
Yeah.
During the time when you were acting CEO, was that the time when there were only 3 members of the board who were non-executive, or that was not the time?
There were 4 at the time, and the
Yes.
4th one was Mr. Tony Dixon.
Yes.
He
So-
subsequently resigned.
Yes.
By the time I ended my tenure as acting CEO, he had already resigned.
So when you started as acting CEO, there were 4 non-executive members of the board,
That's correct.
and it was the 3 that I've just mentioned and the
Yes.
1 that you have mentioned.
Yes.
But before your acting period ended, 1 had resigned, namely Mr. Dixon.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Mpshe, do you remember when he resigned?
He resigned, I think it could have been July, end of July or August. Yes.
Then let's go back to what you describe as interference by the chair to the daily operations. The first topic that you deal with was an instruction to appoint Captain Mache into a position of an operations officer. This interference that you referred to, how did it happen in this instance?
This, what I term an interference, happened around about March 2015, before I was appointed into the position of acting CEO. At the time, I was the General Manager, Human Resources. We had started the Section 189 process of retrenchment.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mpshe. Maybe before you start with specific ones, in paragraph 15 of your affidavit, you do make general observations about interference. Do you just talk about that first in general and then go to the specific that Ms. Buthelezi has asked you about?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. In my personal experience, the Chair will give instructions to appoint persons in certain positions and ask for disciplinary actions to be taken against employees. And these instructions wouldn't be that, for example, when you say appoint a person, ordinarily the company has got a recruitment policy, and the recruitment is linked to a vacancy in the company or linked to a new position in the company. There will be a process that will have to follow to appoint someone. But she will just come and say, appoint this person in this position, or discipline this person for this. So the role of the board is an oversight in the company. The role of the executive is that of an operational, where executive will understand and know that there is a vacancy or there's a vacancy that needs to be created, and it will be initiated through the respective executive. It was unusual that you will get a non-executive director giving instructions that you have to appoint an individual, because the individual will be in the structure, will have to report into an executive or into a department through an executive.
Yes. And Ms. Mpshe, if I may ask, under what circumstances will you expect the involvement of the non-executive board members in the appointment of certain employees? Is it in respect of all employees or a particular class of employees?
The non-executive directors with the chair will be responsible for the appointment of the CEO with consultation with the shareholder minister and also the CFO. The rest will be the responsibility of the CEO for the first line executives, and then cascading to the company like that.
Thank you.
And in this instance of your instruction to appoint Captain Mache in the position of Chief Operations Officer, this position did not fall within the class where an interference from the non-executive board members would be expected. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. This position of Chief Operations Officer was not even in the structure, organizational structure of SAA at that time. And the other important aspect of it is that when we embark on retrenchment through the Labor Relations Act, 189-166A, is that you have to define the new organization, the new roles, and in consultation with labor, look at the structures. And then once the consultations have been done and the structures are approved, that will be the structure of the company going forward. So we had just embarked on this process of retrenchment. The structures had been approved and approved by a subcommittee of the board and approved by the board subsequently. So this was quite a surprise to say the position of Chief Operations Officer must then be included and individual must be appointed.
Yes,
I'm sorry, Ms. Buthelez and Ms. Mpshe, I'm going to take you back a little bit to finalize on the general statements you made, and then we'll resume on this specific one. The instruction that you told me about, that the chairperson, Ms. Myeni, would issue an instruction that certain persons be appointed or certain persons be disciplined. Now, and you talked about there being a recruitment process that is required to be followed, you know, in the appointment of persons to positions. Did you take these instructions to mean that you mustn't follow any procedures that are applicable in the company? Or if I would put it differently, what if she were to come here and say, I didn't mean that you should appoint those people in breach of policies and procedures of the company. You were supposed to follow those procedures. And if you didn't follow them, that was your own decision.
Chair, on this particular one, it's in my, my evidence that I even raised this matter at a board subcommittee called REMCO, Remunerations Committee, where I have indicated at the REMCO, and at the time in the REMCO meeting, Chair was also a member of the REMCO, and Dr. Tambi was the chair, was the REMCO member. Dr. Tambi was the chair of REMCO, and Mr. Tony Dixon was a member of the REMCO. It is recorded at, I think it was 2 REMCO meetings where I highlighted that it is irregular for us to want to appoint people outside of the process, and also people who are not in the positions that are not in the structure is the approved structure. My other concern at that time was we are already in the process of retrenchment, where the employees in the company will be retrenched. And I made it a point that it will be irresponsible also to add a position that's not approved at a higher level in the organization. And I felt that, and I indicated and I put it on record that it will be very irresponsible of us to agree to do that. And Chair, later on, it will also be evident that when it actually became closed, I then said to the Chair, then you then give an instruction in writing, you then change the structures, and then you can then, we will be able to do it. But failing to do that, we wouldn't be able to do it.
So is your answer that, or what is your answer as to whether these instructions that you talk about at a general level were instructions that required the management to do something in breach of the law, in breach of the policies, in breach of procedures of SAA? What do you say? Do you say they were instructions to do things that were against the policies, against the procedures, and against the law?
That is correct, Chair.
and you say that there are specific instances where you raised those issues, that there needed to be processes that would be followed.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mpshe, you have already told us that you raised an issue with this instruction at 2 REMCO meetings, where Chair was also part of the REMCO. But what I want to know from you, did you carry out this instruction? How did you deal with this particular instruction going forward?
Chair, this instruction, I didn't carry it out. And Captain Mamashela was not appointed.
Thank you. And on page 6, you deal with another instruction.
Well, let's talk about Captain Mamashela. What was the chairperson's response or reaction to the non-appointment of Captain Mamashela, or your failure to carry out her instruction?
Chair, obviously it was a tussle at that time, and I was already perceived as somebody who doesn't take instructions from the board and who is obstructive. But further to that, she also indicated to me that Mr. Nico Becerra, who was the acting CEO at that time, met with Captain Mamashela in Mauritius at some airline conference. And Nico recommended to the chair that Captain Mamashela is the appropriate individual to hold the position. When this matter was being raised, with the chair now insisting, I then went to Mr. Nico Becerra and I asked him. Mr. Becerra laughed it off and said, "We met over beer after hours at the conference. It was just a talk and there was no commitment whatsoever. In any case," he says, "I understand what the procedure will be if we have to do that." So he then refuted the claim by the chair that Mr. Becerra refuted the claim that the chair said, indeed, he said, Mr. Mamashela must be appointed.
And then, as far as the chairperson is concerned, did you go back to her and say, no, I'm not able to carry this out, and Mr. Becerra doesn't agree also that he said Mr. or Captain Mamashela should be appointed?
Yes, in the REMCO meeting, I then highlighted to say that this is irregular, and it can only be done if the chair of the board changes the structures and then give an instruction after changing the structures. Because my concern was that this position was not even in the organizational structure.
Yes, so it was a non-existent position.
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct, Chair.
And REMCO is what committee? Do you want to just explain?
It's a remuneration committee a subcommittee of the board.
Oh, and the chairperson served on that committee?
She did serve indeed.
And she was present on the day when you made your position clear?
Yes, she was present.
And what was her reaction to what you said? To your suggestion that the only way in which this could happen is if she changed this, if the board changed the structure and so on?
Chair, she was unhappy about that she had to give an instruction to change the organizational structure. And then changing organizational structure meant also that we had to go back to labor in line with the consultation process of this retrenchment process. She was quite unhappy, and it ended there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mpshe, on page 6 of your affidavit, you deal with another instruction that you received to appoint Captain Eric Manento into a position of Head of Flight Operation. From whom did you receive this instruction?
This instruction was raised by Ms. Yake Kwinana at the REMCO meeting. Ms. Kwinana was also a member of the REMCO, a board subcommittee. And in that board subcommittee, Ms. Kwinana raised the fact that she was on a flight in her personal capacity to East London, and then she was sitting next to Captain Captain Eric Manenze, who was not on duty. He was also on a personal flight to East London. And she then states that...
Sorry, Ms. Mpshe, if I may disturb you there. Did you say, was it raised on a REMCO meeting, or, because in your affidavit it says it was an audit and risk committee?
No, it was raised, I said it by a board member, a chair of audit and risk committee.
Yes, yes.
But she was also, because by that time there were only 3 now.
So all of them served at REMCO?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Yes.
1 second, Ms. Butchers, I don't know whether you might wish to raise your voice a little bit for everybody to hear you at the back.
I will bring the mic forward.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Yes, you may continue.
Yes, and maybe if you could tell us what did Audit and Risk Committee do?
Audit and Risk and Compliance Committee is the board subcommittee that has oversight of audit, risk, compliance, and governance in the company. It is, I think, in my view, one of the most important board subcommittees.
Yes.
That ensures that there's compliance, managing of the risk, and guiding in terms of mitigation of the risk in the company, and also oversight on audit.
Yes, and this appointment of Eric Manenza in a position of a head of flight operation is raised by Ms. Kwinana at this meeting, and then what happened?
Yes, Ms. Kwinana raised this point, and the reason why I've added there is that she is a member of REMCO, but over and above that, she's a board member and she was chair of the Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee.
Yes.
She raises the issue that Captain Eric Manenze says that his role is ceremonial, and then he wants the role to be changed to become chief captain and head of flight ops.
Sorry, what role was he holding at the time?
He was holding the role of chief pilot at the time.
What's the function of a chief pilot, just the main one?
The main role of the chief pilot is he's overall responsible for all the pilots in the organization and the running of the operations.
Yes.
And he would be looking at, making sure that everybody's status compliance in terms of all the bodies that, regulatory bodies that SAA forms part of. So it was actually a very big job.
Yes, in effect, is it a job that required him to basically manage pilots?
Yes.
Yes. It would be his job to know if a certain pilot wasn't coming to work or something, so that arrangements could be made for a replacement, things like that?
Yes. Not only that, to make sure that all pilots are recurrent in their licensing.
Yes,
and compliance.
Yes.
To all the regulatory bodies.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And the role of the head of flight operation, what did it entail?
The head of the flight operations will mean that the chief pilot will also report into the head of flight operations. So the head of flight operations was overall responsible for all the flight operations. There are all other operational issues related to flight operations.
Okay. Was there no person that was holding this role at the time when he wanted to take this role?
There was a person already in the role who was appointed, and was appointed through due process.
Yes. And then what did you do to this instruction? How did you handle this one?
On this instruction, I raised my consent on record at the REMCO meeting to say that I find it highly irregular that a member of the board will raise an issue which was a side issue in a flight in that manner at the REMCO. And I felt that there are processes in the organization where if an employee is unhappy, that they will report to the line manager and raise issues with their line manager. In this particular case, the chief pilot also not only reported into the head of flight ops, they had a general manager of operations. So if there was a problem with the way he viewed his role, it should have been reported either to the head of flight ops and to the general manager operations. So I felt that it was highly irregular. And I said it will create a very wrong precedent that employees can know that I can meet with a board member on the site somewhere, on a social, and then my matters will be raised in a formal a forum like a board subcommittee.
And in
So your concern was that this was a disregard of normal processes and procedures that employees were supposed to follow if they had any concerns.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, and part of the concern was that a member of the board was involved in this disregard.
In perpetuating
In
this.
perpetuating this.
Yes, Chair.
And what was her response when you raised these objections to say, but we can't have a situation where we encourage employees to disregard company processes and procedures?
It was simply said that, listen, this is what it is. We're raising it here, and we are raising it, and we want action out of it.
That was her speaking.
Yes. And the chair, which is Ms. Dudu Mieni, who was not the chair of REMCO, further on and said that it is, she found it very strange that when it comes to appointing a black person, gave racial connotations to it, to say that prior to that, there was a white male in that position, a combined position. And now that it's a black person who is in that, the role has been split because there's a black person who's now in the role. So it just degenerated into racial connotations.
But, I mean, you, as I understand it, your point was there are processes and procedures that employees must follow, and all of us must stick to that position.
That's correct, Chair.
Were they not responding to that? To say, do they say it is the right thing for employees to disregard normal processes and procedures?
Chair, it was my experience that once a board member has said something, as an executive, you have to comply. Hence, later on in my evidence, it says that I was not carrying out board instructions. But of course, the board instructions that I will carry and have to be legal, have to be lawful, have to be within the policies and the procedures in the company. So, and my role as General Manager Human Resources at the time was to guide the board in terms of what are the processes that we need to take as a company to make sure that and the outcome is legitimate, it's legal, and it's compliant.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mpshe, what was the outcome of this particular instruction? Was Captain Manense appointed in this position?
Yes, Chair, but before I can get to that, if you allow me,
Yes.
I just want to give you the background.
Yes, but
As-
also before, I also wanted to establish how the meeting ended, where this issue was raised. Did it end on the basis that we have given you instruction, we expect you to comply, and that's how the topic, there was, the discussion on the topic was ended, or was there further argument about it?
Yes, Chair, there was, which I'll get to now.
Yes,
Please.
okay.
Historically, the role of, prior to Captain Manense holding the role of chief pilot, there was a time in the life of SAA where the chief pilot was seconded to Civil Aviation Authority. And we then required another individual who was senior to become the head, sorry, it was the head of flight ops, was seconded to Civil Aviation Authority.
That is the position that...
Yeah, originally. I'm coming to why it ended up being split.
Okay.
Whereas the inference was that it was a white male who had a combined, now you have a black person, now you split it. Captain Colin Jordan was seconded to Civil Aviation Authority from SAA, and he was the head of flight ops at the time. And then Captain Johnny Woods was the chief pilot. When Captain Colin Jordan was seconded to Civil Aviation Authority, the company SAA gave an undertaking that once the secondment ends, he will revert back to his role and on his level of seniority. He wouldn't lose any benefits, any seniority. And as a result of that, and a situation of convenience was done that Captain Johnny Woods, who was much senior at that time, who was chief pilot, to have the role as a head of flight ops as well. And that was the first time that the roles were combined, but the context was, it was a caretaking role because of that situation.
Yes.
Actually, the positions were not combined, but they were held by one person.
Yes, there was a caretaking.
They remained separate, but there was one person holding them.
Yes.
Yeah, at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. But you may proceed.
And so when, in the end, when Captain Johnny Woods retired, the decision was made that we need to revert back to separating the roles because that situation didn't apply anymore. Hence, the position was separated, and the position of chief pilot was advertised, and the position of head of flight ops was advertised. Captain Manenza applied for the chief pilot. Through due process, he was made the chief pilot. And Captain Sandy Bain applied for the head of flight ops, and through due process, he was made the head of flight ops. So that's where the situation was. At the end of that meeting, so the second meeting, the instruction was given that we must appoint him. So the second meeting, I did a paper, the second meeting of REMCO, I did a paper. And that paper also did a research on comparison on some airlines around the world and how their structures have their structure as far as that flight operations was. So I presented that to the next REMCO meeting and indicated and gave the background as well on paper, and it's in the evidence.
Yes.
At the end of that meeting, and an instruction was issued by the chair. She says, I don't care whether it's best practice or civil aviation authority compliance, I don't care. You will appoint Captain Manenza as chief pilot and head of flight ops. And on receiving that instruction, because that position also, it's part of the regulation, I had to write to the Civil Aviation Authority.
So I'm sorry. It's just important that one understands these things correctly. Am I correct to understand this instruction now to be, I'm not interested in any processes and procedures. Don't tell me about those. The instruction is you must appoint this person to this position.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. And that instruction was from?
It was a resolution of REMCO.
It was a resolution of REMCO,
Yes.
which was chaired by Ms. Kwinana,
Which was chaired by Dr. Dambi.
Dr. Dambo.
Dambi.
Dambi, I'm sorry. But Mr. Dumien and Ms. Kwinana served on that committee, or not really?
That's correct, they served on the
Yeah,
committee.
okay, and they were present. They were part of the second meeting you talk about as well.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Upon that instruction, I had to write to Department of Transport as part of our regulation, and I had to write to the Civil Aviation Authority to inform them that there is a restriction from the board that we combine both roles. And I even had a meeting with a gentleman, I think was a commissioner at the Civil Aviation Authority, following with my letter to them, had a meeting where he wanted to understand more as to what had happened, because that will also mean that the flight operations manual had to be amended to accommodate that change. And they will have to give the authority as the regulatory body. And so I did that. I wrote to them and then revert back to the company. And once I've written to them, and they said they will come back to us on that. So it was a formal application to them to inform them.
Yes.
Back at the company, we had now, upon this instruction, because there were two incumbents, there was Eric Manenza, who was chief pilot, and there was Sandy Bain, who was head of flight ops. We had then had to, even that was also raised, the labor relations aspect to it, that it was going to be an unfair labor practice on the person who's holding the role of head of flight ops, who got the role legitimately in terms of the due process. We then had to embark on an employee relations process where we had to consult with the head of flight ops that the board has issued an instruction. He has to step down from his role, and then his role needs to be given to now Eric Manenze as a combined role.
So this instruction came at a time where both positions were occupied by people who had obtained them after due process.
Yes, yes, that's correct, Chair.
It's just that the one position, that of chief pilot, was occupied by somebody who wanted the other position
Yeah.
as well.
That's correct, Chair.
And your instruction was combine the two positions
That's correct, Chair.
so that they are held by one person. And that person was good to be the one who was at that time holding the position of chief pilot.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And so the position of the head of flight ops was senior to that of the chief pilot?
Yeah.
Is that
Yes,
correct?
in the organizational structure, that's correct, Chair.
Yes. And then,
If you are going to be chief, is it chief operations officer? What the other position?
Chief pilot,
Chief pilot's operation, the other one,
head of flight operations.
head of flight operations.
That's correct, Chair.
Would somebody who gets appointed to that position be the kind of person who would also qualify to be a chief pilot in terms of knowledge, experience, and qualifications?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the incumbent at that time was a very, very senior captain.
So that one would expect that if that person was to compete for that same position, having been there and assuming performance had been good, one would expect that that person would deserve that position more than a chief pilot,
That's correct.
generally speaking.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay, so the instruction was, in effect, find a way to combine these two positions, and what you do with the person who was at that time holding the position of head of flight operations, you must see as management how you deal with that, but combine the two positions, and Captain Manenza should be head of flight operations and chief pilot.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, yes, continue.
thank you, Chair. Tell me, and then what happened to Captain Benz, the one who was holding this position now?
We consulted with Captain Sandy Bain and made him understand that an instruction has been issued, and as really a loyal employee of the company, because he will have had a right to take us to court, either the CCMA or labor court, on an unfair labor practice. He obliged. He said, I obliged. I don't want drama in my life. And he obliged. And then we had to appoint Captain Manenza in an acting capacity pending approval of the Civil Aviation Authority. He was appointed as acting chief pilot and acting head of flight ops, pending the approval of the Civil Aviation Authority.
Do you know if that approval was obtained?
The approval was not obtained subsequently. It was not obtained.
What happened then to Captain Manenza?
He after a while, in the position, I was informed that Captain Manenza was not coping with the role of chief pilot and head of flight ops, and at some stage went to the authorities in operations and said, in the first place, he never said he actually wanted both positions combined.
So he reverted back to his original position?
He reverted back to his original position of chief pilot.
The authorities being, you said he
The
went back to the
General
authorities.
Manager Operations.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. So then, by his own choosing, he went back to being chief pilot.
Exactly, that's correct, Chair.
And how
Did that go via the members of the board who had wanted him to combine both, to have both positions?
At that time, it didn't go through the board because, as I said, allegedly he was not coping.
But what I mean is there a time when a report back was given to the board members to say, well, we sought to carry out your instruction, but Captain Manager has complained that he can't cope, and he says he actually never wanted both positions, and he has gone back to being chief pilot.
Officially, we didn't go back to the board.
But they got to know the information.
Of course they did.
Do you know what the reaction was?
It was quite, I think, them eating humble pie, but of course it was not openly acknowledged.
Yes. But tell me, at the time that the two board members, and as I understand it, it was Ms. Myeni and Ms. Kwinana, who were pushing, who were giving the instruction that Captain Manager should be given both positions. Did they ever say why him and what it is about him that made them to say he must be given both positions, as opposed to saying we think the positions should be occupied by one person, but there should be a process to be followed. Those who want to apply should apply, and whoever is chosen will be chosen. Did they ever say why they were specific that he should be the one?
Chair, the point was the fact that now he is a chief pilot and he's black, and he's entitled to become the chief pilot and head of flight ops. In short, that's what was said.
And in terms of salary, I take it that the two positions were not on the same level in terms of salary, because they were also not on the same level.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. Would he then, once the positions were combined, so to speak, would he then be paid the higher of the two salaries?
He received a management.
I'm sure it was not like he was going to be paid both salaries.
That's correct, Chair. He wasn't paid both
Yeah,
salaries.
yeah.
And as acting head of flight ops, there is an allowance in the company in terms of people who are acting in roles until
Yes.
they are confirmed.
Yes.
So he will have been paid an allowance in
Yeah.
terms of acting.
Okay.
And he was being paid as chief pilot and as a manager, because he was a manager in terms of being a chief pilot.
Okay.
So he was still flying and he was a manager.
Okay.
So then he was paid an additional allowance as the head of flight
Yes.
ops, acting in that role.
Yes. But it's quite interesting from what you say. It's like something that Captain Manenza mentioned just in passing socially on a flight to East London with Miss Kwinana, ended up really causing, it seems, quite some drama at SAA.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. Please
Thank you,
continue.
Ms. Mpshe, out of curiosity, was this the first instance where you had such instances where people will discuss stuff on social gatherings and such social stuff end up being implemented by the board?
Or wanting to be implemented?
Yes.
Yes, the other one that I mentioned earlier on was the Captain Mamashela one. It was social, it was discussed, and Captain Mamashela, I think, discussed with the chair, and then it would needed to be then become a board resolution.
Thank you. And you then give another example of such interference in the appointment of Mr. Kendi Pohleli. What role did he play at SAA? What was his position at SAA at the time?
Mr. Kendi Pohleli was an interim GM commercial. And just as a stand-in, whilst we were busy recruiting for a general manager commercial.
Yes.
And there was an understanding that he didn't meet the requirements of the job, but he had some commercial experience.
Yes.
So he was then appointed on an interim basis. At that time, the CEO was Mr. Munwabisi Kalawe. So he was interim, and then when finally the general manager commercial was permanent, general manager commercial was appointed, Mr. Kendi Pohleli's contract ended. However, his contract was then extended to say that he must be involved in a project in commercial on the expansion into Africa, expansion of South African Airways into Africa. He then worked in that as role on a project basis. And his fixed-term contract ended, and it was rolled over 6 times. On the 6th time when it was rolled over, I had a meeting with the general manager commercial. I had a meeting with the, at the time I was acting CEO, with the general manager, acting general manager, human resources, to say that we are now at the risk of being perceived in terms of a Labor Relations Act that we have created expectation of employment. So if we don't terminate it now, we have that risk that will be forced in terms of the Labor Relations Act to employ him on a permanent basis. And at the time also he had no role, the organizational structure had been approved, he didn't have a role even in commercial. And the contract of the Africa strategy had ended, and because now there was part of the strategy in commercial, and it was going to be integrated in the roles of the people in commercial.
Yes. In terms of years, how long did he remain in this acting position at SAA?
I think it was from 2014 to, at the time was September 2015.
So it's almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years.
Originally, how long was he supposed to be in that position?
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
And each time it was extended, was it extended by 6 months?
And 6 months.
Yes, okay.
Yes. And then what was the outcome of that meeting that you had with the acting HR manager and the manager commercial division?
We all agreed, and a letter was written to Mr. Pohleli, and it was given to him to say that this is the end of his contract and it will never be renewed in any capacity within SAA.
Yes.
And however, he was allowed that he can apply for positions within SAA, and through normal processes, and if he's successful, he will be appointed.
Did he apply for any position at the time?
There's one position that I remember that he applied for and he wasn't successful.
Yes. And then how did the chair interfere with his employment after his contract was terminated?
After his...
Well, she hasn't said that the chair interfered.
Maybe I should
ask her more neutrally.
I should try and rephrase. He was terminated, and then what happened to Mr. Potleli after he was terminated?
At the end of his contract, when we had these meetings, and he was also informed that his contract is terminated and he will never be renewed. And I received a call from the chair, Ms. Mieni, saying that we need to find a place for Mr. Kendi Potleli in the company.
That is now after her contract had come to an end, but before he could apply for any other position, or was it even before the ending of the contract that he had?
That's correct, check. It was before the ending of the contract, because we had written a letter before to notify him.
Yes.
At the beginning of the month of September,
yeah.
we wrote a letter to notify him that his contract will not be renewed.
Yes.
And during that time, the chair then said that he's a skilled person, that he needs to be appointed anyway in the company, in particular in commercial. The meeting that I had with the general manager commercial said they don't have that position in the structure anymore. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's integrated already in the roles of the people within the commercial department. So I then informed the chair that the position doesn't exist anymore. Should there be any other positions in the company, he'll be free to apply. And shortly thereafter, there was a meeting that was called by the chair, and it was termed the board exco meeting.
But before you get to that one, in your conversation when the chairperson called you, did that conversation end on the basis that you said he's free to apply for any other position that he might wish to apply for?
Chair, it didn't end on that note.
How did it end?
It ended on a note that says that how can I, as a black person, now not want to appoint another black person who is skilled? And it ended up with the connotations that I'm anti-transformation. And then she also mentioned that she even extended contracts of other white people that had worked in the company before. So what is wrong with me? And I indicated that I was not aware of the circumstances where she extended those contracts. Now I'm aware of the circumstances. I've highlighted the risk to the company. I've highlighted the risk to him as I was discussing with him. And I've also not only that, went back to discuss with the general manager commercial, and general manager commercial said that position is not in his structure, in commercial. The project had ended. And so it ended up in
a kind of stalemate, or?
In a kind of a, stalemate.
She wasn't happy and you were standing your ground?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, continue. There was another meeting.
Yes, there was a meeting that called for board and exco, and the board at that time were 3 members. And it was on the 28th and 29th of September in 2015. And it was an intercontinental, just at the airport from Airways Park, from our offices. At that meeting, Dr. Tambi was not present at the meeting. So it was Ms. Kunana and Ms. Muyeni who were at the meeting. At that meeting, amongst other things, the chair asked the company secretary to write a board resolution to appoint Kendi Potleli in the vacancy that existed in the office of the chairperson. It became a board resolution.
Was there a position such as that in the structure of the organization?
Yes, Chair. There was a vacant
was,
position
yes,
of a manager in the office of the chairperson.
Yes. But in the past, how was that position filled? What was there a process that would be followed in the filling of that position in the past, or is that something you are not sure about?
No, Chair, I'm very sure about it because I was responsible for human resources.
For human resources, yeah.
When the position was vacant, it will have been advertised.
Yes,
And they will have a specific criteria
yes,
of the incumbent
yes,
in that role,
yes,
which is linked to the responsibilities
yes.
in that role.
So it was subject to, the filling of that position was subject to normal SAA recruitment processes.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
And
So, but in this case, part of your point is that process wasn't followed. And one, and two, the appointment was by way of a board resolution.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Yes. And this phenomenon of board resolution appointing an employee, was that something that had happened before, as far as you know?
It has never happened before, Chair,
Yes.
and it was really a first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, please continue and tell me more about that meeting.
Then it was said it was a board resolution to appoint Mr. Kendi Pohledi in the office of the chair, which is a position that was vacant. However, there were specific requirements for the role, and the role was going to report to the company secretary. And the role was a very important one in that it was going to be a link between the shareholder representative and the board and into the organization. So there were specific requirements. And I remember just on top of my head, one of the requirements was either a person who will have had or some kind of a company secretariat or some kind of a paralegal understanding the requirements. And the company secretary was in the meeting when this was said, and they did the resolution.
And who was the company secretary at this time?
The company secretary was Ms. Ruth Kibuka.
And she was the company secretary throughout the period that you will cover as acting CEO?
To date, yes.
Yeah, okay, even to date?
To date.
Okay, all right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So when at the end of that meeting, we go back to the office, and I then go to her as the line manager, who has also done this board resolution. I said, so where to now? She says, no ways, no way. This person doesn't meet the requirements. And there is no way that I can appoint this person in that position.
Well, did she need to appoint? Wasn't the person appointed already by way of a board resolution?
There was a board resolution to that effect.
Yes, continue your conversation with the company secretary.
So I then said to her, nonetheless, I leave it between you and the human resources manager to see the recruitment through, because I cannot interfere as there is a board resolution to that effect. Finally, Mr. Pohledi was invited to come to the interview, and he didn't go to the interview.
He was invited to come to the interview?
Yes, he was going to be interviewed, he was not going to be appointed.
Well, hang on. I thought you said the board resolution was saying he was being appointed.
Yes.
So, but the company secretary wanted to subject him to an interview first.
Yes, yes. That's correct, Chair.
Which meant that the company secretary wasn't prepared to have him there unless some kind of process had been followed.
That's correct, Chair.
I guess even if it wasn't the full process, because there was no advertisement
Yes.
of the position.
That's
So she asked him to come for the interview, and he did not come to the
And
interview.
then he didn't go to the interview.
Do you know why he didn't go, or did he say, "I've been
he was
appointed"?
phoned
What
to-
the interview is for? What now?
For the manager in the office of the chair.
Yes, no. I'm saying, do you know why he didn't attend the interview, or did he take the attitude that I've been appointed to what is the interview for now? Do you know what?
The feedback I received is now, it was between the line manager, who was the company secretary, and the HR manager at that point. The feedback that I had received from them was that he said he's not interested
In the position?
in the position.
Oh. Oh, okay, yes. So he never started in that position.
He never started in the position.
So that was the end of the implementation of that resolution.
That was the end of the board resolution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And Ms. Mpshe, on this board resolution of the 28th and the 29th of September, if further down your affidavit on paragraph 32, it looks like it was challenged. What was the basis for challenging this board resolution?
The board resolution, it was not only board resolution, and all the board resolutions that were done at that meeting,
Yes.
the colleagues challenged them, some of the EXCO members, and said it was not a formally constituted board meeting. There was no quoration. And so as a result of that, those resolutions are null and void. They're not legal and they're not binding because they were as a result of not a formally constituted board meeting.
Yes.
So that one of the resolutions that was queried,
Challenge, yeah.
challenged.
And
Yes.
do you know who attended this particular meeting?
Who attended this particular meeting I mentioned earlier was Ms. Quinana and Ms. Mieni, and then the rest of the EXCO members. Myself, at that time, I was acting CEO,
Yes.
and Mr. Mayor was the CFO, Mr. Nico Becerra, who was as a subsidiary CEO of Mengo, he was in the meeting. Mr. Sylvain Bosk, the GM Commercial, Mr. Musa Zwan, who was the CEO of subsidiary of SA Technical, Ms. Nibi Moodley, who was acting in my role, the company secretary, Ms. Kibuka, and the deputy company.
Relating to what the minimum number board should have, if you know.
Yes, Chair, it was not in line. However, I think that through the company secretary, I think the chair did write to Department of Public Enterprises or National Treasury at the time. Wrote to National Treasury at the time, and National Treasury then confirmed that if they appoint me as the acting CEO, as a non-executive director, they can have 5. It will have 5 board members, which at that time they felt that was sufficient, while pending the appointment of the rest of the board members. Previously, we had 12 board members. I think then the next number that I'm aware of was 9. Never was it 3.
But you were, when you were acting CEO, you didn't become a non-executive, director of the board.
No, I
You
wasn't.
remained an executive director or acting director, or
Yes.
whatever the position is. What I'm concerned about is whether the prescripts allowed the number of non-executive directors to be so low, namely 3. Is that something you know, or is that
I
something?
wouldn't know, Chair, but I had heard that legally and in terms of the Companies Act, it was not the correct number for board members.
Because if you have just mentioned that at some stage there were 12, now I don't know whether that's just 12 including executive directors or,
Yes.
or including executive directors.
Including executive directors.
When it was 12 including executive directors, do you know how many non-executive directors there were?
There were about 10, if for my recollection.
Yeah, so Then you moved from there to only 3 non-executive directors. It's an undesirable situation. But anyway, yes, continue.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mpshe, to wrap up on this issue of Mr. Pohleli, on paragraph 33, you talk about his other appointment.
Please raise your voice again, Ms. Buthelezi.
On paragraph 33 of your affidavit, you talk about his other appointment in October of 2015.
That's correct.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Ms. Buthelezi, didn't keep your eye on the watch.
Oops. Is it tea time?
I think we must take the short adjournment, a tea break. It's 11:15. We'll resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
Thank you.
Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mpshe, we were on the last aspect regarding Mr. Potleli. I wanted to find out what happened to him then in October 2015. You deal with that in paragraph 33 of your statement.
Yes, Chair. Mr. Potleli then, the Chair formed a committee, and the committee that was going to be responsible for the Africa strategy. And Mr. Potleli is now invited to become a member of this committee. There were other members in that committee,
Yes.
and being Captain Mamashela, being Captain Manenze, and some other staff members. What was odd about it was that Candy Potleli is appointed into the position, into that committee, whereas he's not an employee of the company anymore.
Yes, so the other members.
This was now in October 2015,
Yes, his contract ended in September 2015.
15. Now, this committee that you say the chairperson formed, was it a board committee? What was the status of this committee?
It was like an advisory committee. It was just a committee. It has never been formed before.
Yes, and it was not part of the board
No,
structure?
it was not part
or
of the governance
management structure?
Yes,
So it was, for all intents and purposes, an informal committee?
it was an informal committee.
Yes. Okay, all right.
Thank you. Was this committee part of your turnaround strategy? Or
No,
meant
it
to be?
wasn't.
Okay. And the other members of these committees, were they employees of SAA?
They were employees of SAA, and as I mentioned, Captain Mamashela, who was supposed to be appointed as Chief Operations Officer, and Captain Manenze, who was then Chief Pilot and Head of Flight Ops acting. There was another gentleman, Mr. Tebukotsimane. They were all permanent employees, with the exception of Mr. Potleli.
But it looks like 3 of them, of members of this committee, were persons that the chairperson or Ms. Kwinana at different stages had instructed you to appoint.
That's correct, Chair.
And in regard to one of them, you had refused. In regard to Captain Manenza, you tried to comply, but he ended up saying he never asked for both positions and he was not coping, and that was the end of the plans to have him appointed to the position of head of flight operations.
That's correct, Chair.
And then the third one was Mr. Potleli. So all 3, there had been attempts by either Ms. Myeni or Ms. Kwinana or both to get them appointed in one or other positions.
That's correct, Chair.
And who else was in this committee apart from the 3 then?
It was Mr. Tebukotsimane, and I can't remember the other members.
Yes.
On top of my head.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Mpshe, was Mr. Potleli now part of SAA employees? Was he remunerated for this position? What was the case?
He wasn't an employee. He was not remunerated. Dr. Tambi, who was now the chair of this special committee, was the one that will sign him into SAA for the meetings. But he wasn't a permanent employee. He was not remunerated.
So what was,
Dr. Tambi was an executive director of the board.
He was a non-executive director.
He was a non-executive,
Yes.
or he was the 3rd member of the
Yes, he
board
was the
out of
3rd
the
member.
3. Yes,
Yes.
okay. Now I remember, yes.
Yes, Chair.
thank you. So what was his status at SAA at that stage?
He was not an employee.
Okay, thank you. Then let's move on to another example of a contract or an instance where there was an interference. It was the cancellation of LSG SkyChef's contract. We have had evidence from Dr. Dahwa on Friday regarding this particular transaction. Before we go into details with regards to this to this contract, I want to understand the status of this company, LSG, in South Africa. Was it a South African company? What did you know about this company?
Chair, what I knew about the LSG SkyChefs was it was a subsidiary of Lufthansa Airlines, but it was a South African registered company, and it was employing South Africans. It was based in South Africa. That's the legal status that I understand of LSG SkyChefs.
Okay.
Yes.
Just 1 second. Thank you.
Thank you. Other than it being a subsidiary of this company, Lufthansa Airlines, is it based in Germany? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. Other than being a subsidiary of Lufthansa Airlines company, what was its status in terms of BEE compliance in South Africa?
Chair, it had the required credentials for BEE. It was a South African company.
Yes, okay.
Yes. We heard from Dr. Dahwa that processes were followed before its appointment. I want you to give us a history as to where this contract emanated from.
There was a time when our customers were really complaining at the lounges, airport lounges, about the service and the provision of meals and just the look.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think Ms. Butcher started much earlier. Before the events that you are going to talk about in terms of your statement relating to it, had this company had any relationship with SAA at all before these events?
They had no relationship and no relationship with SAA.
It had not done any business with SAA?
Not at all.
Okay. And then it was appointed to provide catering, is that so? At a certain stage?
Yeah.
Catering services?
Yes, the tender was to catering at the airports.
Yes.
And also it was part of a partnership with Investec, who
Yes.
then renovated
Yes.
our lounge at OR Tambo International, the premier lounge on domestic.
Yes. Now, were you involved at all in the awarding of the contract to this company?
No, Chair, I was not involved.
You were not involved.
Ordinarily, a CEO, acting CEO, will
Would
not
not.
be involved with tenders.
Yes. There would be a certain level where a CEO would get involved in terms of the amounts involved in terms
Yes,
of value.
if
And
the
this-
amount...
And this did not fall under that?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, okay. So you wouldn't know about the processes that were followed in regard to them. All you know is you expected that processes would have been followed and you know that it was appointed.
Chair, I know that processes would have been followed to come to a point when then it was awarded the tender.
Yes, yes, okay, no, thank you. Continue.
I wanted us to give us a history on how this contract emanated. Then we'll then go to your involvement in as far as this contract is concerned.
Okay. Chair, the contract emanated as a result of our lounge were not being competitive anymore.
Yes.
There were other banks that were supporting, like Slow Lounge was becoming the most popular and at the domestic terminal. So Investec came into a partnership with SAA to revamp our lounge and sponsor our lounge. And because we needed a catering offering that will go with the new look that we actually wanted our premier customers to enjoy. That's how the tender came into play. Investec sponsored the renovation of the lounge, and then the next offering will have been the meals and the ambience, which was done will have been done by a catering company, an airline catering company.
Ms. Mpshe, before this, who was servicing your lounges?
Our lounges were serviced by Air Chefs, which is a subsidiary of South African Airways.
Yes. Do you know if, when the tender process opened up, Air Chefs was also invited to bid for this particular contract?
I am aware, Chair, that Air Chefs was also invited to tender.
Yes, we now know that LSG Skychips became a bidder of choice by those who were responsible for selecting the company to service those lounges.
That's correct, Chair.
What was the value of this contract?
It was 85 million over a period of 3 years.
And the 85 million, was it per year or was it a once-off amount?
She said over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
Thank you. In your affidavit, you mentioned that you wrote a submission that you attach under tab 10, whereby you inform the board of this particular contract. Tab 10 appears from page 91 of the documents under Annexure DD 15A.
That's correct.
Yes. Is that the submission that you made?
Yes, I am. As an acting CEO, Chair, it was within the delegation, even of the Chief Procurement Officer at that time.
Yes.
And I just felt that it would be courtesy to inform the board that there will be a new service provider for us at the airport when we open the new lounge that was being renovated. There was no procedure that was felt that it was important that they are aware of what's happening with
Yes.
Approval that you expected from the board at that stage?
It was a notification.
Yes. And this notification is dated the 20th of August 2015. We have heard from Dr. Dahwa that on the 21st of August, the award was made to LSG Skychips.
Correct.
Just tell us what then happens on the 1st of September or shortly thereafter. You deal with that on paragraph 36 of your statement.
Well, before that, let us say you sent this notification to the board, and was there a response or reaction to it?
Chair, I didn't receive a response on the same day
Yes.
of the 30th of August. And subsequently, I found an email which was dated the 1st of September. But on the 1st of September, I had gone to Parliament with board members and some of my colleagues to present to the portfolio on public enterprises.
Yes.
And in that meeting in Parliament, somehow it was the matter of LSG Skychips was raised to say how can a German company be awarded this tender. And the chair was not in a position to respond. Dr. Dahwa, who was there, responded. It also caught us by surprise because it's not something that we had prepared for. We had prepared to table the strategy and progress on the strategy of the company. Yes. So it became really something that was discussed for a prolonged period of time, wanting to know the details. And it was positioned as if it was a German company which was awarded this tender, whereas it was a South African registered company that was awarded the tender. At the end of the meeting, once we were outside in
I'm sorry. Do you recall who raised the issue? Was it a member of the portfolio committee or was it somebody else in the meeting in Parliament?
I remember the chair mentioned when she was asked a question relating to the strategy. And then out of nowhere, she then said, you know, we are non-executive directors. We go to SAA 4 times a year. And then now we hear that they have awarded this German company a tender. And then other portfolio committee members, I remember a member from EFF and other members started asking questions emanating out of that.
Okay, thank you.
So it was,
continue.
so it was the chair, your chair, Ms. Dudumieni, that raised the issue that there has been a German company that was awarded a tender.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. And then what happened from there?
At the end of the meeting, we were waiting outside for transport to take us to the airport, and she was highly irate. And she said to me, "You mean black people can't?" That black people can't cook.
Ms. Mpshe, do you know what your lounges were being serviced by air chefs?
Hang on, Ms. Buthelezi.
Yes.
She hasn't finished telling us about her conversation with the chairperson.
Oh, maybe I should
She has
get
just
to
told
finish.
us the chairperson asked her, do you mean black people can't cook? Let's hear the story. How did you respond?
I responded by saying, I think maybe we should discuss this at the office, because my correspondence to her of the 30th outlines exactly the process that was taken. And I moved away from her to stand, you know, just with other colleagues.
You were very unhappy.
She was irritated, you know, beraging me in front.
Sky chefs, what happened to those people?
In the negotiations with LSG Sky Chefs, we negotiated in terms of Labor Relations Act, what you call Section 197 going concern, meaning that we wanted to limit loss of jobs from air chefs. So we were in partnership with LSG Sky Chefs, discussing with air chefs that they will take over the employees that were employed by air chefs that were going to be working at the airport in the lounges. So that process had already started. In fact, the people were already transferred. The people already were trained, were busy being trained in preparation for the opening of the lounge. So it was not as if that there was going to be a loss because of the nature of the transaction, that it was going to be a going concern. So the employees were transferred into the company now that will be handling the services at the airport.
Yes, and then you came back from Cape Town. How was this issue then discussed further at the office?
On the 2nd of September, I then received an email which was sent on the 1st from the chair,
Yes.
and saying that I must hold back the offer of the tender,
Yes.
not issue it to LSG Sky Chefs. I then responded to the chair to say that the offer has been given already to LSG Sky Chefs. My email or memo to her and the board was just a notification. And I then went further to say that LSG Sky Chefs were the legitimate awarded legitimately the tender because they were the best in terms of the people who tendered. She then asked about air chefs. I then went back to the Chief Procurement Officer, Dr. Dahwa, and says, tell me what happened in that process. And then I was informed that air chefs was eliminated out of the process because they didn't even submit the full documentation that was required in terms of the tender. That's why they were not in the tender process. They had applied, they didn't complete the full documentation. And I explained all that information to the chair.
This was now on another occasion when you had done this homework you went back to her to explain
On the
it.
second, when we came back from Parliament.
Or the first conversation you had with her after Parliament, after Cape Town, that's when you explained all of this to her?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. You had, in the meantime, found out more information of what had happened to the company that had been there before?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And what did she say when you explained all of this?
She then said, no, it's okay, I hear you, but, you know, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes.
And then after that, she then wrote an email indicating that as the board, they ordinarily don't want to intervene with the daily operations of the company. And, but however, they want me to cancel the award of the tender to LSG Sky Chefs. On receipt of that instruction, called the Chief Procurement Officer, Dr. be really for us to award this tender to an external company, to the airline. And already in the first email, I had explained that the reasons and the background why air chefs, we needed to revive and revamp the lounge, was because of part of this was the offering was very poor. The food and customers were complaining. So she then says, no, they have an obligation to air chefs, and we must cancel the LSG Sky Chefs a tender and award it to, and give it to air chefs.
Yes. In fact, that email.
I'm sorry, Ms. Buthelezi. This is still in the email, or there was a discussion following her email with you?
There was I responded in email, on
Yes.
email.
Yes.
And then she wrote back on email.
Oh, this is the exchange of emails.
This is exchange of emails.
Okay. So, but you say that the only reason really advanced in the email correspondence why the tender should be cancelled was that she or the board had a responsibility to the company that was a subsidiary of SAA.
That's correct, Chair. And she was the
No
chairperson.
other reason.
And
really.
she was the chairperson of the Air Chefs board at that time.
She was the chairperson of the SAA board and chairperson of the SHF's board.
That's correct, Chair.
Was that in order?
There were three board members.
Yes.
So she was the chairperson of Air Chefs, and Ms. Kwinana was the chairperson of SA Technical as subsidiaries.
Yes.
And Dr. Tambi was sitting in at the Mango board, though Mango had an independent chair of the board.
Yes.
So there were only three of them. So
Yes.
you will have to have a chair of
Yes. Yes.
coming from the bigger board.
Yes.
So she was the chairperson of the South African Airways board, the group, and she was chairperson of SA Technical.
Was that in order? Well, you were the acting CEO. Was it in order to have that situation in terms of board members? I mean, how do you, when you are chair of the board of a company that has made a tender to a company whose board you are chairing, how does that work now?
Chair, simply it will have been a conflict of interest under normal circumstances.
But it didn't cease to, it couldn't have ceased to be a conflict of interest. Maybe somebody might say there was just no other way of doing things because there were only 3 members of the board. But I guess there is not much you can say about it.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. So, but is my understanding of your evidence correct that the only reason really that she gave in the email correspondence at least, leave out the remark whether you meant that blacks can't cook. In terms of the emails, the only reason given why the award should be, to LSG should be cancelled was that she felt that she or her board needed to be responsible. And being responsible meant that she had to give instruction that the award to LSG be cancelled and the tender be given to the other company whose board she was also chairing.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. Yes, okay, continue.
Chair, if I may be of assistance, Ms. Mpshe, the email correspondence from the chair where she was giving her reasons appears on page 111 of Exhibit DD 15A. Would you please read the second paragraph, it's in fact the third paragraph of that email, where the one that starts with the board doesn't want to interfere with due process, and the next paragraph that follows.
The second paragraph, it says, this is from Ms. Duduzile Mieni to myself and copied to herself and Miyake Kwinana and Tony Dixon and John Tambi and Ruth Kibuka. It says the board does not want to interfere with due process, which belongs and is better managed by the executive. The board is, however, particularly more interested in the principles applied in this contract and award.
Yes.
Having said that, where the board feels that the implementation does not take proper consideration of pertinent principle, then it will bring this to your attention as the acting CEO. At the meeting, the board did precisely that. It raised a concern that the awarding of this contract might have unintended consequences that affect certain strategic considerations. Examples could mean supporting South African businesses, enhancing local employment, considering the impact on your own subsidiaries, here being air chefs, to the discussion pertaining this contract. Hence, the board asked that, to the extent possible, we would like the executive to suspend further consideration on this process until we were provided with information on these concerns. This was on 26 August at the board meeting. No one was on site. If, as you inform us, that a contract has been awarded, then the board does not with the legal process. We did not have that impression at the board meeting. Regardless, however, of the state of this tender, the board requires answers to its concerns. Some of these you have provided answers to below. There are other questions outstanding, and your answers have raised others. This must be provided urgently. The board requires a comprehensive review of the awarding of this tender. I'm now particularly interested on what grounds a chef failed to meet the initial threshold and was eliminated from the evaluation further. Regardless of the outcome of this tender, that must surely be a major concern of the board. I also believe that we need to be quite clear on another issue raised by you in your email. The board delegates authority to the executive to implement certain activities. The delegation policy is a board policy. The board remains legally, per the PFMA, accountable for the implementation of decisions under that policy. Having delegated this authority does not limit the board in addressing issues arising from the execution of these, and it does not mean the board may not review the delegation limits if necessary. The fact that this matter was within your delegation of authority does not prevent the board in questioning the matter. In conclusion, if the company has lawfully committed itself to the successful bidder, then we do not wish to interfere with that process. However, the board urgently requires a comprehensive review of the awarding of this contract and to better understand the application of the decision-making process. Would you please arrange for that to be provided before the end of day on 15 September 2015? If you require any clarification of what is required, please do not hesitate to contact me. Air chefs did raise many objections, questioning the motive of this, but were defeated. We have to get the answers as to why and by who was this being done. Regards, Ms. Dudumien.
Yes, we have heard your evidence that among other issues, the issue of job losses was catered for. But I'm interested, how did you respond to this email?
The response.
Before that, I see that in this email, it seems, at least in certain parts of it, that she is saying, if you have already awarded this tender, we don't want to interfere as the board, but we would like to be fully informed as to how that came about and how the principles were applied. Is that your understanding as well?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, continue.
Yes, but how did you respond to this email? You were saying before that, what happened?
In the response, I then requested Dr. Dahwa to give a full background in line with the request from the chair, and then I forwarded the responses to the chair, copying the board members.
Yes. When did the final instruction to have this contract cancelled come?
Well, no, before that, let's identify the response that you sent to her.
Yes.
If it is in
It's
the
the next
bundle.
annexure, Chair.
Yes.
Under tab 14. On page 114. Is that your response to the chair?
Yes, my response is the second part of the email.
Yes. Would you please then read your response for the record, starting from point number 1?
Okay.
Well, she might not need to read the whole of it,
Yes.
unless it's considered that the whole of it is important. Otherwise, she can just highlight the important features of her response.
Please do highlight those features, Ms. Mpshe.
But if you take the view that the whole needs to be read, you can tell me, but it seems to me that just highlighting the main features might be enough.
Okay. I suppose I will say on from point 7.
Yes.
Now linking to the point
Yes.
of my lead,
Yes.
that there are no job losses emanating from the award of services to LSG Sky Chefs, as any impacted Air Chefs employees will be transferred to the successful bidder. as per conditions set out in the tender document and in accordance with Section 197 of the Labour Relations Act. Notwithstanding that, LSG Group is a collection of companies under the German-registered LSG Lufthansa Service Holding, and the lounge catering services have been awarded to Sky Chefs South Africa, a South African registered entity which locally sources and produces products procured by SAA. Accordingly, and in imposing of its obligations to the board, management wished to highlight the legal implications inherent to the board decision to cancel the award of the services, having regard in particular the legal requirement for the board to be fully apprised of all relevant details in reaching a decision of this nature. Please kindly refer to the attached legal memorandum and annexures thereto.
Yes.
Well, I think paragraph 6 of your response at page 115 is important. You want to read that?
Chair, which point was that?
Paragraph
Point
6.
Paragraph 6.
Yeah.
As per the board notification of August 2015, responses to the RFP were received from Air Chefs, LSG Sky Chefs, and Denata/New Rest. A lawful and duly constituted procurement process was followed, in respect of which all received responses were properly evaluated. In this regard, it must be noted that Air Chefs failed to meet the initial minimum threshold for evaluation in the tender and was lawfully precluded from proceeding to further stages of evaluation.
Yes, and how were these news received?
Yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Buthelezi. I think paragraph 4 also is important. Maybe you can read that.
Sorry,
Paragraph 4.
Paragraph 4.
I think is also important, yeah.
Okay. As the board notification of August 2015, in electing to go out on tender, the business carefully considered the strategic implications of Air Chefs possibly not being selected as a successful bidder vis-à-vis the business imperative of the retention of premium customers in a highly competitive market. In addition, due consideration was given to any adverse market perceptions created through electing to tender for lounge services, thus covering 4.265 of services rendered by Air Chefs in relation to their total SAA account. This paragraph states that if they are not receiving the lounge tender, it will only be 4.26% of the whole offering at SAA, because they will continue to render the services with the aircraft.
So it was a very small percentage.
It was a very small percentage.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
You may continue, Ms. Buthelezi.
How were these news received by Chair?
The news were not well received.
Yes.
In particular, I remember a response from Ms. Kwinana. I think in a response she said that this is treason. This decision to award LSG Sky Chefs is treason.
That's Ms. Kwinana.
That's Ms. Kwinana.
Yes. Prior or after this email, or you can't remember that part?
It was after.
I think it must have been prior. Ms. Mpshe, if I may refer you to the 2 emails that you received on the 3rd of September. The first one is from the Chair. It starts from the same paragraph 115 where you were, at the bottom of paragraph 15.
The 3rd of September, it's tab, which page? On the same one?
Yes, on the same page, page 115. At the bottom of that page, there's an email from Duduzile Nieni to Yake.
Yes, the email.
Yourself and other members of the board.
Yes.
Yes.
You want me to
What
read
was
it?
said on that email, yes.
Yes. This is now from Ms. Mieni on the 3rd of September. And it says, as previous acting CEO knows well, So the previous acting CEO knows well what we wanted as a shareholder. And this process, which was started in May, is contrary to our decision. The board in February and March discussed outsourcing air shares to an outside company. The reason we did not advertise the CEO position was based on this. Secondly, before the commencement of the LSG, at the board meeting, no one made any submissions or raised these things to us at the board meeting. A thorough investigation is fully supported as per the noting the submission should be nullified. As a shareholder, we have responsibility to ensure that beneficiaries are assisted. Must be the best interest of SAA and South Africa.
Yes, and before that, below that email, there's an email that...
Ms. Buthelezi, I think there is some jumping that has happened. You see, when you were asking her about the email, her response to the chairperson,
Yes.
starting at page 114, which goes up to 115, I realized from the content thereof that the email seems to be talking on the basis that the board was saying, or the chairperson saying the
Yes.
it looks like they finished reading earlier.
Yes, even...
Follow.
Chair.
Everything go in accordance with the sequence, because otherwise you...
From Ms. Kwinana comes on the further down that page, page 116. Would you please just highlight the important points on that email?
The important points I'll go to at paragraph 3.
Yes.
I recommend that the award be cancelled. And if they claim for damages, the letter was written on the 20th, and that's what it is that they will have prepared between 20th and the 3rd, unless they knew that the tender is theirs. I must take this opportunity to say that I'm very disturbed by this decision.
I'm sorry, what page are we now on, Ms.
We are
Buthelezi?
on page 116, Chair.
Sorry?
116, 116.
Before we deal with that, was Ms. Kwinana the only one at that stage who had written or talked about cancellation of the award, Ms. Mpshe?
The chair also in her letter, the chairperson, Ms. Dudumieni,
Yes,
had also referred to the cancellation of the
Oh, which letter? Let's look at that. I just don't want us
email.
to skip the sequence, yeah. Ms. Buthelezi, where is that letter?
On
from the
page
chair?
116,
It's on page
Is it that
116.
one?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
on the top paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, the contract without the shareholder noting the submission should be nullified. That is reference from Ms.
Oh.
Muyeni.
Oh, that's, is that, and her one is it date? Email on the same date?
The following one was this.
Yeah, saying, they both wrote on the same date, saying
Yeah.
nullify or
Yeah.
something along those lines.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, continue.
I started with paragraph 3. I recommend that the award be cancelled, and if they claim for damages, the letter was written on the 20th. And what is it that they would date the tender is theirs? Let me to say, very disturbed by this is making me very nervous. I will wake technical. My simple question is, if South African Airways and its subsidiaries were owned by you, would you give business to your competitor if you do exactly the same business? Chairperson, this looks like treason, and I request this to be investigated by the SIU, Special Investigating Unit.
Yes, so this is where it all started, this issue of cancellation of this contract. Is that correct?
That's where it started, correct.
Yes. What was you then responded to them in the email that in a manner that you referred to earlier. I wanted to know, did you at any stage consult your legal department to seek, to get an opinion?
What will the impact be on the company if we go ahead and then cancel this LHD Sky Chefs tender?
Yes.
And then in that email, I then alluded to the legal opinion.
Yes. And what were the conclusions by
I'm sorry,
the legal department?
I'm sorry, Ms. Buthelezi. Are we now on, are you referring to an email other than the one that you read earlier on from you to the chairperson?
On the email of the 8th.
Is that the one that we dealt with earlier from
Yes,
you to
yeah,
the chairperson?
yes.
Okay. all right.
I responded there, and by
Yes.
that time, in that response, I had already gone to the Chief Procurement Officer to outline the process. Also gone to the legal department.
And what of your legal department with regards to the cancellation of this contract?
The view of the legal department was that we will really suffer consequences to the extent of the value of the duration of the contract, which is about 85 million, and further other reputational damage. I think those, I remember those two on just on.
Yes, yes, if I may assist you. If you can look at paragraph 134 and read the conclusions there that were reached by your legal department.
Paragraph
Is that
1.
134?
Page
affidavit?
134 of page 134.
Page 134,
Yes,
in conclusion.
yes.
What is at page 134 first, before we
Maybe
hear about the conclusion?
Miss,
It's a
Mpshe?
legal opinion.
yes.
Yeah,
Please
let's
look
hear
at
that, what it
paragraph
is.
127.
Okay, I'm
that-
sorry,
the same
Ms. Buthelezi.
paragraph.
Hang on. Let the witness tell us what is at page 134, and then she can tell us, read to us the relevant part.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, there's a legal opinion.
Does it start at page 127? From FA's time,
That's correct.
legal opinion come about.
I had then requested on where the chair used the word nullified, that contract needs to be nullified. I then contacted the legal department and asked them to give us a proper legal opinion as to what
Yes.
the impact and the consequences for the company will be.
Yes.
Should this contract be cancelled, the award be cancelled.
Yes. And this was the legal opinion that they
This was the legal
gave you.
opinion.
Okay, what was the conclusion that they gave you? I think that's the paragraph in this book.
Yes, there's a paragraph the paragraph at page 134. At the bottom of page 134.
Yes, and conclusion, the tender for catering services at SAA lounges was procedurally and lawfully awarded to LSG. This award was in line with the PFMA and the PPFA regulations, as well as the South African Airways procurement policies and procedures. As highlighted above, the cancellation and or putting on hold of the award may result in possible legal action and financial exposure against South African Airways.
Yes.
Any decision to suspend or cancel the award of the tender by SAA will amount to administrative action, which action will need to be objectively fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. No duly constituted meeting of the board was held regarding the subject matter, whereof, and as such, any decision taken in this regard will be considered and that acting engages with the board and to provide the board with the background information in this memorandum with annexures to assist the board in making an informed decision based on all the available information on the matter. And Ephraim Lusenga,
Yeah.
what legal advisor?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
The legal opinion states that any decision to suspend or cancel the award of the tender will amount to administrative action, which action will need to be objectively fair, equitable, and transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. It further says, no duly constituted meeting of the board was held regarding the subject matter, whereof, as such, any decision taken in this regard will be considered invalid and stands to be set aside. I think as part of responding to that, then that meeting was used as a duly constituted a meeting of the board to then justify the decision to cancel.
Yes, but but the legal LSG had been lawfully and properly been given to LSG, and I haven't read the whole memorandum, but it looks like there's an extensive discussion of the process. Wasn't there discussion in the board of all the points being made, or the main points being made by the legal opinion?
Chair, if you're asking that there was a follow-up board meeting in respect of this to discuss.
No, I'm saying by the time of the board meeting of 28, is it 28 and 29 September?
Yeah.
Yes, by that time, the board members had received the legal opinion.
That's correct, Chair.
And one assumes they had read it and digested it.
That's a correct assumption, Chair.
One would then think that at least there would be quite some deliberation of the issue before the resolution was decided upon. And my question is whether there was such deliberation and consideration of all issues relevant to this issue, or was it this is what we want to do and a resolution given?
Chair, I'm not aware of any deliberations.
And you were part of the meeting?
I'm just aware at the meeting
Yes.
that then it was said that a resolution must be taken,
Yeah.
that tender must be nullified.
And you're attending the meeting?
I
You
was
attended
at the meeting, Chair.
So
That was that. As I remember.
yes. Okay, thank you.
My mic was off, I'm sorry, Chair. Ms. Mpshe, if I may refer you to page 138 of the same file. DD 15A.
100 and?
138. There is an email on that page at the in the middle of that page. There is an email that is sent to Mrs. K. Is that Mrs. K? Is that Ms. Kibuka, the company secretary?
Yeah.
Yes, from Mabana Mache, that has an extract of the board resolution of the 28th. Would you please just says involved by the board of directors on the 28th of September 2015?
It was resolved that the SAA Domestic Lounges tender award be retracted and the catering contract be awarded to air chefs without going through the bidding process.
Yes. And then after this resolution, then what happened to the contract? Was it cancelled?
The contract was then cancelled.
Tell me, Ms. Mpshe, what was your view to all this that was unfolding before you as acting CEO at SAA?
It was a nightmare.
What view did you take of this whole thing that was evolving before you?
It was a nightmare. And my understanding of the role was for the CEO to ensure the implementation of the company strategy. And the focus was not on the implementation of the strategy. And the board is supposed to have an oversight and then also manage and measure or guide the CEO in terms of the implementation of the strategy. And that was not the focus.
What was the feeling of you, of other members of the executive management about these things happening? You have been sharing with the commission a number of instances where the board or the chairperson or Ms. Kwinana were giving instructions that so-and-so must be appointed to that position, so-and-so must be disciplined, so-and-so must be given that contract, and not so-and-so. What was the effect on the management leadership of all of these things happening?
Chair, it was a very difficult time. And, you know, the EXCO members were really concerned about what's happening. We're also concerned for me because as the acting CEO, the instruction will come to me. And it was like, so what needs to happen? And the morale was very low at the time when there was all these instructions happening. And it was quite negative because it was really not what we should be doing as executive committee members. As I said, we needed to be implementing the strategy of the company, not to be hiving and push back and refusing unlawful instructions, the board's supposed to have an oversight on the implementation of the strategy of the organization through the executive, and being the executive being the acting CEO, who will then have the committee reporting. So each one of us had a responsibility. Each one of us had a part to play in the implementation of the strategy. And that's really what needed to be done. But half the time, we were focused on this pushback and responding to things which really not had direct link to the implementation of the strategy. And at the time, SA was in a very difficult position. Hence, there was the turnaround strategy, the implementation of the turnaround strategy. And when Mr. Nico Becerra left, he had started implementing what at that time was termed the 90-day turnaround. So he left before completing the 90-day, and I was charged, together with the executive committee, to conclude that 90-day. But half the staff was not linked, aligned to that.
Thank you.
Ms. Mpshe, how prevalent was this practice of having board members interfering with the contracts or the people to be appointed? How common was it at the time, in general?
Prior to me becoming acting CEO, I was not aware of that happening with other CEOs. I was not privy, I was not at that level. I was not aware. But linking to Ms. Mzimela's testimony, when she was outlining the role of the board and the role of the executive, I'll concur with the role of the board being having oversight, and then the role of the executives being implementing and the strategy in the organization. And that was my expectation.
Yes. And on paragraph 41, you deal with what happened to the delegation of authority for some members or ESCOM members at SAA. What brought about this change to delegation of authority?
I'm sorry, did you say paragraph 41?
Yes, paragraph 41, Chair. It's at the
Okay.
bottom of page 12.
In paragraph 41, when I had informed the chair, and she was coming back and saying that one of the reasons I stated was this was just common courtesy, and it was within my delegation of authority. And in her anger over that, she then, at the meeting of the 28th and 29th September, came up with another a board resolution to say the delegation of authority for the CEO will be reduced by 50%, and that of the executives also will be reduced by half.
So what was the implications of this?
They mean that as the delegation of authority of the acting CEO was 100 million at the time of the CEO was 100 million,
Yes.
will mean that anything above 50 million will then have to confer to the board.
Yes.
And it would imply now that the board will have to be involved in the day-to-day operations and the nature of transactions of an airline. Either it's a lease or it will be along those. CEO's delegation was at that time 100 million to enable the CEO to run the business.
Thank you. On the next issue or the next topic that you deal with in your affidavit appears on page 13 of your statement. The appointment for what you deem
was cancelled. LSG was told the award that you were given is hereby cancelled or withdrawn, and then you awarded it to the SAA subsidiary. And was that the end of that matter?
Chair, yes, we had to, once the the resolution was issued, I then informed the Chief Procurement Officer, who ordinarily would be liaising with the company, to then inform them that there's a resolution of the board to then nullify or cancel the contract that had been awarded. And that was also done, as indicated by Dr. Dahwa in his testimony on Friday. However, Chair, I have now since been informed that LSG Sky Chefs is suing SAA currently, the case is on currently, meaning that the risk I had highlighted is now materialized so many years later.
For the same contract?
For the same contract. That's correct, Chair.
Yes. And in the meantime, I mean, you said that prior to the to LSG, the SAA subsidiary had it, but there were complaints of poor service and so on. Is that right? Or did I
Yes.
misunderstand?
That's correct, Chair. They didn't go on a tender. As a
Yes.
subsidiary and
Yes.
providing catering,
It was providing the service.
they were also
yes.
providing the service.
Yes.
That's correct, Chair.
But the service provided by the SAA subsidiary seemed not to be satisfying the customers. There were complaints.
It was substandard, Chair.
Yeah, it was substandard.
Yeah.
Do you know whether after they were then now asked to continue after the cancellation of the award to LSG, do you know how their service was like? Was there an improvement from what had been the case before?
Chair, we did receive compliments from our premium clients to say that the lounge really looks beautiful, and the ambience, decor is looking good, but the food is still the same.
Well, theirs was on the catering part, isn't it?
Yes, on the catering.
Whatever other they belong, their part was providing.
Their part was catering,
Yeah.
yes.
And in regard determination that the SAA
Chefs do better. We have to rescue our chefs. We have a responsibility and an obligation to a subsidiary of SAA. I don't remember that it was ever discussed on the improvement of their offering.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Then let's move on to the next topic on your affidavit, the topic of ad hoc investigations for ulterior purposes. Could you please give us a general view on why do you have this view or this opinion that these forensic investigators were used for ulterior purposes?
Yes, Chair. We just then became aware of forensic investigations. And these investigations were directed to some employees within the company, mostly at executive level. And they would be asked to, there's a service provider panel facilities was then requested to conduct forensic investigations. So it became more and more at that point in time.
By who?
Were asked by the chair. On certain employees.
Yes. Was that because they were board resolutions? Or that service provider should do that?
A lot of it was that the SA had a whistleblower service, and the at that time, but they will. The person who was responsible there was the chief audit executive, who then will report to the chair of audit risk and compliance. So Ms. Kwinana was the chair of audit risk and compliance. So all these whistleblower things coming will come there, through to, from Deloitte to that chief audit executive into Ms. Kwinana, and they will make a determination whether there is merit into the whistleblower being investigated or not. So that's how the whistleblowing came, and
Yes.
the forensic investigation came as a result of this
Information
information.
from the whistleblowers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Did you have specific firms that formed a panel of these forensic investigators? How did they get appointed?
Yes, Chair. Because SAA is such a big organization, we have panels. We'll have legal panel, we'll have a panel of forensic investigation, we'll have commercial, legal panel for commercial, we'll have a panel for employee relations or ER or labor matters. So we had different kind of panels. So whenever the matter was specific, if it was a labor matter, we would then have to go to the legal, the ER panel.
Yes. So for any forensic investigation, one would expect that the firms that were on your panel for forensic investigation will be appointed for such.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. You deal with the investigation that was conducted by ENS. Is that Edward Nathanson is attorneys?
That's correct.
Were ENS part of your forensic investigators? Were they on your panel?
As far as I know, ENS was on the panel for the legal aspect, not on the forensic investigation.
Yeah. You know how they got to be appointed to do this particular investigation that you made an example of in this? in your
Yes, as far
statement?
as I remember, was that ENS was appointed in the investigation of the previous CEO on his matters, relating to his matters.
Yes.
And subsequent to that, they were just then appointed and the scope extended without following due process. That's my understanding of ENS.
Yes, and the investigations that they've conducted, who were they directed to, or who were they investigating?
The first one was investigating Mr. Nico Becerra, who was my predecessor, and who was CEO of Mango. And it was also to look at, there was allegations that he was favoring Mango with contracts that they've had with SAA. And the other one was Mr. Wolf Meyer, and it was investigated, it was two investigations, one on any financial improprieties that could have happened, and also on the fact that he allegedly carried a recording device in the form of a pen to a meeting with the chair. And Mr. Sylvain Bosch was also asked to be investigated. Also, his matter came through the whistleblowing.
Yes, and who was responsible for extending the scope of this forensic investigation?
It was Mr. were responsible. Now, the peculiarity of this particular whistleblower was it emanated from Ms. Kwinana, who then outlined what the whistleblowing is to the Chief Audit Executive. So Ms. Kwinana, who's Chair of Audit Risk and Compliance, writes an email to the Chief Audit Executive to say, I have this whistleblowing and this is what it's all about in relation to Mr. Sylvain Bosk.
So it didn't come via, sorry, the portal?
It didn't go through the portal. It was an email from Ms. Kwinana to the Chief Audit Executive.
Yes, and then what were the findings?
I'm sorry. Was Ms. Kwinana, for purpose of this complaint, the whistleblower?
She's the one that wrote the contents of the whistleblowing in an email to the Chief Audit Executive.
Saying she got this information from where?
From a whistleblower. Yeah.
Oh, so a whistleblower would have spoken to her and not used the normal whistleblowing
That's correct, Chair.
processes.
That's correct, Chair.
And she didn't direct the whistleblower to use the whistleblowing process.
Ms. Mpshe, the non-executive board members, like Ms. Kwinana, Ms. Mnyeni, did they have offices were they stationed at SAA? Were they there full-time, like yourselves and other employees?
Ordinarily, non-executive board members are not supposed to be full-time at the company. The chair had the office, as the office of the chair.
Yes.
It was purely when she had meetings or in preparation for board meetings. But they were not supposed to be at the company all the time. But during this time, they were there very regularly.
Yes. And how accessible is SAA in terms of how accessible were they when they were in these offices? Is it possible for someone to just walk in and make a report to a person like Ms. Kwinana, as it happened in this instance? How is that possible?
It's practically impossible, Chair, to get into SAA. Anyone who's tried to go into SAA, you have to go to the gate, there's a security outside, and you have to be checked, and you have to have a parking or arrangements done or meeting someone. You wouldn't just go into SAA and rock up at the reception. It will have been, it had to be arranged for anyone to come through and stated the person that they are seeing, and when they arrive at the main reception, and then they will then say the visitor, or Ms. Mpshe, your visitor, Ms. Buthelezi has arrived, and then you'll have to escort the person into the building. So it was not that you can't just walk in into SAA. So the point is for somebody to walk in and meet with the Chair of Audit, Risk and Compliance and then relate in SAA, it's impossible.
Thank you. With regards to this particular investigation of Mr. Bosk, what were the findings and how were those findings received by the board?
Well, before the findings, you told us Ms. Kwinana sent this email to the chair, to the
Audit Chief Executive.
Yeah, Audit Chief Executive. And then what happened after that?
What then happened after that was that I was already back in my role as General Manager Human Resources, and an instruction was issued to Mr. Musazwani to suspend Mr. Sylvain Bosk on the basis of the whistleblower.
Or you had ceased to act as CEO
By the time
this complaint, if you want to call it that, was to be acted upon.
yes,
And your successor as acting CEO was Mr. Musazwane.
that's correct, Chair.
Yes, but I think before we get there, there is something that is relevant to your ceasing to act that you need to tell us. You remember that, Mr. Butchers, from the affidavit.
Yes, we
Yes.
will get there
Yeah.
later, Chair. But let's just finish this issue of Mr. Bosk.
Yes.
What were the findings of this particular investigation, and how were those news received by the board?
You know, there were a lot of investigation. ENS did the investigation. There was a disciplinary hearing held for Mr. Bosk, and it was conducted by external people. I think there were about 3 advocates who were running the investigation, and
Yes.
with ENS as well. There was an external advocate being the presiding officer, ENS were the disciplinary officer, and there was another advocate, I can't remember the name.
I'm sorry. Looks like there are some sounds that
Yes,
Are
the officer is
disturbing
checking on
us.
it, Chair.
Yeah, let them check. Okay, please continue. There was an external advocate who was chairing the disciplinary inquiry,
Yes,
and ENS were, so to speak, the prosecutors,
yes, because they did the investigation.
because they had done the investigation.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Final, and Ms. Kunana was a witness.
Yes, and what was the allegation against Mr. Bosch?
The allegations for Mr. Boss was that he misrepresented the profitability and the viability of the Johannesburg Etihad route with Etihad Airways. I think that was the main. There were a lot of other allegations on the original
Yes, complaint.
allegation.
Yes,
But the
this
main
was the
one-
main one.
Yes, the main one was the misrepresenting the commercial viability of the Etihad route, which
Yes.
was a co-chair with South African Airways.
Okay,
And the outcome is that he was cleared on all charges.
yes,
And ordinarily then he will be, once you cleared of the charges and he was on suspension, the suspension will be uplifted and he will continue to work. The other peculiarity about this was that
You said earlier Ms. Kwinana was a witness.
she was a witness.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you know whether her evidence was limited to saying a whistleblower had given her information and she had written an email to the executive who was supposed to deal with it, or did it go beyond that?
The focus was only on the misrepresentation of Mr. Bosk on the commercial availability of the Etihad
Yes,
route.
yes.
And when she went, and now this was related to me by Mr. Bosk, that Ms. Kunana went there wearing a scarf of the South African flag, and indicated that Mr. Bosk should be found guilty on the charge. And the presiding officer apparently asked to say that if he's not found guilty, what will the response of the company be? And then she said, we'll find something else to get rid of him. And
This was related to you by Mr. Bosch.
This was related to me by Mr. Bosch.
Yes,
After the
Chairman-
disciplinary, we were in touch on a daily basis.
yes, yes.
As to daily what was happening.
Yes, okay.
Chair, may I place on record that Mr. Boss is still gonna be called as one of our witnesses?
Yes, no,
later.
that's fine,
Yes.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Yes,
May I proceed?
yes. What she's saying is that I shouldn't be concerned if you are telling me what Mr. Bosch said, because it will be confirmed. So
yes.
it's not to say don't say it, it's to say it will be confirmed.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Mr. Boss was cleared of all the disciplinary charges, and the company refused to accept the finding, and they refused to,
The company or the board?
Mr. Musazwani said, the chairperson of the board,
Yes,
gave an instruction that the suspension should not be uplifted and he should not come back to work. So he stayed at home, and I think about 16 months he was at home.
60.
16, 16.
16.
Yes, he was at home.
That's over, just under
16.
1.5 years.
That's correct, Chair.
But that's including before
It
the
was
hearing.
including, yes.
Yes. Do you know how much of that fell outside after he had been cleared?
I think it was longer than 6 or 7 months after the
Yes.
hearing.
Yes.
I stand to be
and
corrected.
I take it he was being paid while at home,
Yes, Chair.
and somebody else was acting in his position? Or?
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah, okay. And then what happened?
I'm not sure whether we should get into
Well,
Mr.
I just
Bosch.
want ultimately how the matter relating to Mr. Bosch was finalized. Mr. Zwane said,
Yes,
the
the chair,
chairperson.
yes, the chair said he shouldn't be reinstated. They don't want him back at the company. And then in the final analysis, out of desperation, he just said they didn't want to do a mutual separation with him. Mr. Bosch is a French national, and during the course of this hearing, he had to go home to get money for his legal fees from his coffers at he had at home in France, in Paris. So at the final analysis, he then literally begging them to say, look, if you can just pay my legal fees, I'll walk away. Because they refused to do a mutual separation with him. And then that's how he finally left SAA. Even then, they refused to term it as paying his legal fees. They then termed the exact cost of the legal fees as a mutual separation figure. And that's how he left.
And do you know if they signed what they may have called a settlement agreement?
They would.
But one, he had been cleared in a disciplinary inquiry chaired by an external chairperson.
That's correct, Chair.
But from what Mr. Zwane told you, the chairperson of the board had instructed him, that is Mr. Zwane, that he should not lift the suspension, Mr. Bosch's suspension, and said that the company did not want Mr. Bosch back.
That's correct, Chair.
And then ultimately, and Mr. Bosch stayed at home for a number of months thereafter before he then reached some agreement with them.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before I move to the next topic, I could see
Or maybe
it's now 1 o'clock.
before we get that, did you ever get to understand what it is that Mr. Bosch may have done that made the company or the board not want him back, other than what he was cleared for?
Chair, it's just one of those that Mr. Bosch wouldn't just accept an unlawful instruction, and he would, put the policies of the company and look at the interest of the company. One of the things that I'm aware that he was asked to do that is to revert back to the Durban-Cape Town route that SAA must fly between Durban and Cape Town. And Ms. Mieni said that the members of parliament from Durban complained they don't want to fly Mango because a decision was taken long before Mr. Bosch came that it was not profitable. So Mango as a low-cost airline was the one that was running Durban-Cape Town. And then Ms. Mieni says that the parliamentarians are complaining that they don't like Mango as a low-cost company. It doesn't fit with their image. As a result of that, they were flying BA.
Well, I just want to say on a lighter note, I am from Durban.
Chair, the commercial
yes.
decision was done
Yes.
long before Mr. Bosch started in
Yes,
SAA.
yes.
So it was then said that Chair was saying, even herself, she's flying BA between Durban and Cape Town because it hasn't got business class. Mango is a low-cost airline with no business class. So she gave an instruction to Mr. Bosch that I'm aware of, that we should return to that route and move Mango out of the route. And Mr. Bosk went and did a business case again, referred back to the original discussion, did a business case, and came back and informed Chair that that route is still...
It's not viable.
It's not viable. That's one of the matters that I'm aware of. The other matter was insisting that we should apply to fly to South Sudan. And saying that it came from the president that we needed to fly to South Sudan.
Now, this was an instruction from
the chair,
the chairperson
Yes.
again,
Yes,
to Mr. Bosch,
yes,
to say there should be a new route.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So, Mr.
Again, this is something that Mr. Bosch told you, or it is something
No,
that
it's something
you
that was
became
said
aware of as
yes, it was discussed publicly, even discussed in an ex-committee.
well? Okay, all right.
So he also, I'm sharing with you what I'm aware that
Yes,
was
no,
asked of
it's
him
very
that
important.
he
It is
didn't do.
important. Yes.
He then did the whole thing, like in commercial, in an airline, in commercial, you have to do the viability and you have to do all things and do a business case, and also before even that you have to do before you even apply to, in terms of the PFMA, Section 54, to apply to the shareholder representative. So they did the work. And in doing the work, one of the things that they had to do was to assess risk, as South Sudan was at war, assess the risk with security and with legal, look at all the other stakeholders that will, and give input into a business case that will then support whether the route can be embarked on or not embarked on. And I remember the outcome of that investigation of the business case came out to say that it is, in terms of security, dangerous to fly into South Sudan as part of a war zone. The airspace is closed for commercial airlines into South Sudan. And also the legal opinion that also came was that if we were to insist to fly there, our aircraft wouldn't be insured because it's part of
A war zone.
a war zone. So in the end, I remember when he presented to EXCO,
That is Mr. Bosch.
Mr. Bosch presented to ESCO, after the legal opinion and all other things, the risk assessments were done, the risk people and the security people also gave their input that it would be dangerous to fly there. And then it was discussed and say that it is not viable. And then the chair was still insisting, I think Mr. Bosch will elaborate, insisting to say that the government will subsidize.
Yes.
But then what was the out of it was that we cannot use our aircraft because then we wouldn't be insured.
Yes, yes. No, thank you. It is 5:00.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take the lunch adjournment now. It is 1:05. We will resume at 2:05. We adjourn.